Hello and welcome to the Ideal Nutrition Podcast. My name is Aidan and I'm here with my co-host Torwen, and this is episode 249 where we're going to be talking about berberine and doing a bit of a deep dive on it.
So berberine is a naturally occurring compound, particularly an alkaloid, which is found in several plants, including things like golden seal, barberry, Oregon grape, and tree turmeric. It is pretty known in traditional Chinese and also Ayurvedic medicine, but recently it has increased popularity a little bit, being known as nature's metformin. So what it does is it activates an enzyme called AMPK, which plays a key role in energy metabolism and blood sugar, by increasing glucose uptake into cells, suppressing glucose that's produced in the liver, and also improving insulin sensitivity by reducing inflammation and lipid accumulation. So metformin does similar things, and this is why people have started saying that it's nature's metformin.
And in addition to that, from a cholesterol standpoint as well, it kind of upregulates LDL receptors on liver cells as well, which is how it plays a role in that too. And then, yeah, as you said, there's a few mechanisms around inflammation. So yeah, I also think it's interesting when we consider switching something from what we'd consider alternative through to like Western medicine, so to speak. And I think one of the key distinctions is like once there's like consistent evidence in randomized control trials and stuff like that, that's when it kind of tends to make that switch over as well to also being kind of an accepted option here. But we will talk about all the research and support for or against of it as well.
Let's start with diabetes then. So research does seem pretty positive across the board in diabetes. Specifically, this makes a lot of sense because of the mechanisms that are relevant for insulin sensitivity and also glucose metabolism. So the potential for berberine to lower blood glucose has been tested in a study by Zhang et al., where 116 participants with type 2 diabetes and also dyslipidemia were either allocated to a placebo or a 1 gram daily dose of berberine for 3 months. They then assessed changes in plasma glucose and also serum lipid concentrations, which we'll come back to. But the 1 gram of berberine per day group found a reduction in fasting blood glucose levels of around 20%, and also reductions in HbA1c.
Yeah, so that's super promising. And that was also the first study I read on it as well. And obviously with any kind of thing like this, you can be like, well, that is just one study that's promising, but should we go out of our way to recommend it? We fortunately have heaps more than just that as well. So there's a review that was looking at 37 relevant studies, and it just found that it consistently helps with the management of diabetes. It all kind of lined up with that. So it actually is an area where the research seems pretty consistent.
In terms of cholesterol then, it has also been proposed to reduce cholesterol by inhibiting specifically a PCSK9, which is a protein that normally helps to destroy LDL receptors on liver cells. So when there's less of this activity, more LDL receptors end up surviving, allowing them to be pulled out of the bloodstream for clearance. So the study that I just mentioned before, they also looked at blood lipid concentrations. And in terms of the group that was taking that 1 gram a day of berberine, all of their levels, including their triglycerides, the total cholesterol and LDL cholesterol, was all lowered, which that's pretty significant.
Yeah, in terms of average numbers seen across the research, and I've included this in the show notes as always, there was a review that found that the average drop across a lot of studies looking at this, making the assumption that they had elevated cholesterol at the start, the average drop was 0.5 millimole per litre for total cholesterol, 0.4 millimole per litre drop for LDL cholesterol, 0.3 for triglycerides, and then a small increase in HDL as well. So it's just pretty good news across the board.
In terms of weight, then, that's another one that's interesting. Again, because it has similar effects as something like metformin, people are comparing it to weight loss medication and how it can support that. And it has been seen that it potentially could help. The question kind of is whether or not it's better than other weight loss medications.
I've got a lot of thoughts on this. So like how you referred to as nature's metformin, the TikTok trend I'd been seeing was nature's Ozempic. And I think when we're looking at weight loss, that kind of makes it an even bolder claim, because if we look at research looking at metformin and weight loss, often we do see like small consistent weight losses with metformin, but it is emphasis on small. And that's probably what you would expect from a lot of things if the mechanism is just related to things like the insulin and glucose side of things as well, without going too deep talking about that. But fortunately, again, we do have research looking at this. So like probably the most famous study looking at this, they had about 80 participants. They compared berberine versus placebo for 3 months. The average weight loss was around 1.5 kilos. And the thing that stands out to me the most on this is obviously we do a lot of research and prep for these podcasts. And I read a lot of research, I listen to podcasts, I read a lot of like general articles and stuff like that to see what people are saying. The amount of times I opened a general article and they had like some form of hyperbole about how good berberine is for weight loss and they cited research, this was the one that was cited. And like they'd use like really strong words, like really powerful for weight loss. And then you read the thing, it's like 1.5 kilos. Like, what are we talking about here?
That's not so significant, especially since we know that potentially other weight loss medications actually support 10 to 20% of body weight, which is much larger than just 1.5 kilos. So
absolutely not an equivalent. And same thing, looking at like a broader range of studies across this, the average weight loss seems to come out as about 2 kilos. So it does fall into that category of small, consistent improvements. I wouldn't rule it out for this, but I do have a little bit of a caveat that I do want to add here. There are quite a few options that potentially cause nausea or GI issues where people report like 1 to 2 kilos of weight loss. Not report, sorry, the measurements come out as 1 to 2 kilos. And that is a common side effect of berberine as well. There's a lot of GI issues that occur. And I might add some context around that later, but I wouldn't be shocked if that plays any role in that 1 to 2 kilo drop as well.
Moving on then, should we have a chat about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, or as it's now known, metabolic dysfunction associated steatotic liver disease? That is an absolute mouthful. We'll go with MASLD. So in terms of this, when it comes to berberine, the research is actually, again, pretty encouraging. And it might even be better than looking at just weight loss on its own. So I had a look at a 2024 meta-analysis that kind of compiled 10 randomized control trials and looked at over 800 participants. And the results all showed some pretty meaningful improvements. So they found reductions in liver enzymes, things like ALT, AST, GGT, which we normally look at in terms of markers of liver health. So that, along with improved insulin sensitivity and potentially a bit of supported weight loss, is pretty positive for MASLD.
Absolutely. And when I was looking at this, like that stood out really clearly. What I was curious on is there a decrease in fat in and around the liver that's like kind of like more so than just what you'd expect from 1 to 2 kilos of weight loss or whatever? From the research that we do have, it does seem like that is the case, but it's a bit too early for me to like have a strong take on it because it does seem to be hard to spot reduced fat anywhere. So I'm not going to claim berberine's magical for that, but what we have looks promising there too.
How to take it? Do you want to start with this one?
Sure. So gold standard seems very consistently to be around 500 milligrams 3 times per day, approximately 30 minutes before meals. It also has a relatively short half-life, so it typically peaks in the blood after somewhere between 1 and 4 hours. So this is another factor as to why we'd be doing it multiple times per day.
And before meals as well. Weaving into that then too, it is a relatively poor bioavailable substance, which means taking it pre-meals as well as splitting the doses actually does help improve absorption. I think I read somewhere that it's kind of around 1% absorption potentially, which that is low for a supplement.
Yeah, I think that's one small factor into why it's like not super popular because it's very easy to dismiss it because of the bioavailability being super low. And I did go deep looking at protocols and like how can you improve that? And it really does just seem like the time of meals is like the simplest and easiest one to really move the needle on that. The other stance I do have on this though is all the research we've just spoken about is occurring kind of like despite the fact that the bioavailability is super low. So it's almost like if you forgot about that and you just didn't pay any attention to the bioavailability, these benefits are still existing.
I did read a few things which might come out in the future in terms of whether they can combine berberine with other substances to improve the bioavailability, which would be huge. But I think there needs to be a little bit more research in that space first.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing we had on our list, like prepping this, I don't know where I got this before we even started prepping, was like whether the supplements contain what they say they contain, because this is a pretty like common theme, particularly like the less common certain supplements are. And a US study, not an Australian one, but one from the US from 2017 found that the average berberine content was about 75% of what the label listed. Their standard allowable percentage discrepancy is anywhere between 90 and 110%. So 75% obviously falls outside of that. And 60% of the products that were tested would have failed to meet that standard. Hard to say, is this a big deal or not? Because then it raises the next question of what's been used in research. Have they been using products that contain 75% of what the label is listed, or are they using completely accurate products? I don't know the answer to that question, but I do still think it's interesting to know that there are many times you could purchase this and it has like noticeably less berberine than you expected it to.
So if you're listening along, we wanted to have a bit of a chat about why we think it's maybe not as popular, despite it seemingly having so many positive advantages for overall metabolic health. So one of my thoughts, again, Aidan mentioned before, but common side effects are gastrointestinal symptoms. Things like diarrhea, nausea, constipation tend to happen even at the standard dose of 1.5 grams a day. That can be a pretty big barrier for people wanting to use substances like this. Absolutely.
In terms of frequency, it seems to be about 15 to 35% of people experiencing that. And particularly the higher up that you get with this, the more you could see why people wouldn't be that interested in it, because like maybe it's having the positive effects, but it's like you don't want to feel that way as well.
I also think the dosing can be kind of inconvenient for people too. Having to take a supplement 3 times per day before meals, that can be hard, especially if people aren't having consistent regular schedules, things like that. So that's just another barrier maybe for people not taking it.
Yeah, I don't know how people who listen to this will like perceive that. I think that is a huge factor myself. Like, as somebody who cares a lot about nutrition, sometimes I'm like, well, if a protocol helps, I'll just do the protocol. But like, something that really shifted my perspective was in 2016, I did a systematic review. I didn't publish it. It was part of university, like my project or whatever, research project, on calcium and vitamin D supplementation. And something that massively stood out to me was there was a lot of calcium supplementation studies that didn't noticeably reduce the risk of fractures, which is what I was measuring in elderly populations. And if you just did a subgroup analysis and you took it to the group that was like the people who actually took the supplements, it looked so much more promising than the intention to treat, which is like the people who enrolled in it and did it to a certain standard or anything like that. And the thing with calcium supplementation that stands out is you just have to take it twice a day, because you can't absorb it fully well at those dosages if you're having it once. And it just really stood out to me being like, damn, you get anyone to do anything twice a day and the odds of them doing it just drop off a cliff. The same thing happens with 3 times a day. So whether my own personal opinion or anything like that, I'm like, oh, this protocol's not that hard. You just take a thing 3 times a day. It doesn't really matter. People really do struggle with this. It actually is a big handbrake.
Wonderful. Well, anything else you want to add?
I do have one more thing, and it's just the practical kind of thing. Do you ever recommend berberine to people? Like, we've just gone through a bunch of like research. No?
Honestly, no. And before we decided this was going to be a topic, I had heard about berberine, but not massively. And I think, yeah, it's not something that I have recommended, but potentially I do think if it can help with so many different things, why not give it a try?
Yeah, it is an interesting one. Like, even just like the cholesterol thing, like how many people do we work with who have high cholesterol? It's tricky because there's so many things we can do that can help, and it's always a bit hard to choose. Where I typically stand on berberine with people is if I have somebody who's kind of willing to do a lot of things, and they're always like, more, what else can I do? I do sometimes think, well, this could be an easy thing that we add in, and let's just like try it, monitor, see if we are getting GI issues or anything like that. And I'm even more likely to lean towards it if we're in a situation where some other options are off the table. I actually did have something I was going to come back to that I realized I like put in bold in my notes that I kind of skipped over earlier that is kind of on that example. And it's a bit of a shame here. But gestational diabetes, I actually care about this way more than you expect. I did a placement in a gestational diabetes clinic, and it made me like way more passionate about it than you would think. I had a really good supervisor too, which probably played a role. But in gestational diabetes, unlike type 2 diabetes, you often don't have the lever to pull of just losing weight to become more sensitive to insulin. Like in many cases, they'll become more resistant to insulin as time goes on throughout the pregnancy, right? And it suddenly would make people tend to be like medications often recommended a lot quicker because there is no, let's do lifestyle first. It's like, this is probably just going to get worse over the pregnancy. Obviously there's things you can do with your nutrition, but you can't just like lose weight or whatever. And a situation like that, I would instantly be like, berberine could actually play a role there. The shame I was going to say though, for that one specifically, is there are a few situations where you shouldn't take berberine. The first one, which is unrelated to what I just said, is there are certain medications you shouldn't take it alongside. So if you were to look at it, I think you should check that first with your doctor, look it up yourself, do your own research, whatever. One little thing I would flag on that is often people talk about it leading to more hypos. Like if somebody was hypothetically on like certain diabetes medications, it might be more likely to lead to that. The research doesn't seem to support that at this stage. It's like it's a cautious approach. It could make sense, but at this stage, the research shows it doesn't seem to lead to more hypos. It just makes people better to a certain point or whatever. But the gestational diabetes one, it is unfortunately not recommended because there are actually documented cases of it being negative for the baby, so you can't take it during pregnancy. And it's like, that's actually a really clear-cut thing. You can't take berberine during pregnancy.
It's a great thing to add on. Well, this has been episode 249 of the Ideal Nutrition Podcast. As always, we hope that you enjoyed today's episode, and if you did, we'd appreciate you leaving us a positive review. Thank you.